In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front brake pads and brake rotors on this Land Rover LR3. These are the primary tools that we need to replace the front brake pads and rotors on this LR3. We need a 22 millimeter half-inch drive socket for the lug nuts, a 21 millimeter half-inch drive 12-point socket for the bolts that hold on the anchor plate where the caliper is mounted to. Half-inch drive ratchet, half-inch drive torque wrench, 3/8 inch drive ratchet with torque wrench, a 10 millimeter can be shallow or deep, 13 millimeter socket, a T45 Torx, 17 millimeter open end wrench, preferably a skinny style, so it'll be thin, extra thin, and a C-clamp. When we have the truck up in the air and the wheels off, it's probably a good idea to check the torque on the tie rod ends as well. So I've got an 18 millimeter socket to do that, and I'll have an extension to make it easier to access that. To begin, we need to loosen the lug nuts on the wheel that we'll be working on. We'll need to jack up the vehicle, support it on jack stands, finish removing the wheel, and then if we're working on the left side, we need to turn the steering wheel all the way to the right so we expose the brake caliper for easier access. With the front wheel off, we can see the brake caliper and the rotor in all of its glory. This is a good time to take a peek around the wheel well and look at the CV joint boots, look at the strut, look at the tie rod ends, maybe give some things a wiggle, and check the general condition of everything. We'll need to take out this 10 millimeter screw to loosen up the brake lines. We need to take out the low brake pad warning sensor. The workshop manual says to use your fingers. For some reason, I can't get any purchase on that, so I'm going to use some needle nose pliers. And just gently work him out. We're now going to remove the brake pads and the caliper. The workshop manual says to remove the lower bolt and then lift it up, but we're going to remove the upper bolt, lay it back, and support it with zip ties. I've daisy-chained several zip ties together to get the reach that we need. Wrap one end around the upper A-arm. Be careful not to crush any wires or sensors up there. And then we'll put the other end through the bolt hole that we just pulled out. And then adjust the zip ties so your caliper is resting back and there's no tension on those cables. Take out the old brake pads. Now we need to push the pistons back into the caliper. You need to be very careful. Don't ever touch the brake pedal when you have a caliper released like this. Don't push the pistons in when you have the other caliper open like this as well, because you run the risk of pushing the pistons out of the other caliper. Take one of the old brake pads, set it on the pistons, and then take your C-clamp and start working the pistons back in. It's also a good idea to check the level in your brake fluid reservoir to make sure that someone didn't fill it up, and when you're pushing these back in, you overflow it. With the brake pads out and the pistons back in, we'll tighten up the zip ties to make it sit a little bit tighter so it won't hang when we remove it completely, because now we're going to take off that lower bolt. The zip ties could support the weight of that, but I'm just going to go ahead and set it on the sway bar just in case. With the caliper off, we need to check the slide pins, make sure that those guys are moving freely, and they are, and then we'll remove the little bolts that hold on the anchor plate. If your brake parts came with a new clip for this, you can just go ahead and take these guys off and discard them. I don't have new ones, so I'm going to go outside and hit these guys with a little bit of brake cleaner and clean them up. The brake rotor is held on by a T45 Torx, so we'll need to take that off now. If you live in an area with a lot of corrosion and you're concerned about this guy being frozen up, it's a good idea to hit it with some penetrating oil before you start working on it. And if you're very concerned, you can use one of those hammering impacts to bust this guy out. I've gone outside and sprayed off the new rotor, got rid of the packing grease that was on it, and cleaned off my little clips as well. And now we are ready to start putting it back together. We're going to put the rotor retaining screw in. This gets torqued to 26 foot-pounds. The caliper mounting bracket goes back on. These bolts get torqued to 203 foot-pounds. My torque wrench only goes to 150, so I'm going to set it to 150, torque them to 150, and then add a little more oomph to it. And hopefully we'll be around 203. Slide the new brake pads on. Install the brake caliper. The little bolts that hold the brake caliper on get torqued to 26 foot-pounds. Now, I'm going to reuse the old sensor because I didn't burn through it. If you burned through yours and your warning light came on, you'll need to replace the sensor. Just unclip it, follow it back, and then you'll find the electrical connector and snap it back together. So I'm just going to stick mine back in. We've replaced the rotors and the pads. We've cleaned off our little clips, put our sensor in. We are ready to put the wheel back on, tighten the lug nuts to 103 foot-pounds, jack it up, take our jack stands out, and put it back on the ground, and we are ready to go. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm going to go and put down the torque specs and the tool list in the description of the video.